Matthew, thank you for taking a minute out for the show today. I appreciate it.
No, of course. Thank you for having me, Joe. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Yes, sir. Me too. So before we get into Jackie Robinson Real Gone, I want to know what propelled you to write about Jackie and kind of this love of baseball that made you come up with this collection of poems.
So I've always been a baseball fan. I was a baseball fan long before I became a poet. And I feel like a lot of writers, especially sports writers, you eventually stop. I mean, you figure out in high school, college that the pros aren't it for you, but you still want to keep at it. So like writing has been a way to kind of still stick in the realm of sports. And baseball was my first love. And without Jackie Robinson, probably not a baseball fan. And it's about, I mean, the title includes like Jackie Robinson's Wheel Gone, but it's also Baseball Poems of New York because it's about Jackie, but it's also about the history of baseball in New York and like my experience growing up. I'm originally from Westchester County in New York and then Stratford, Connecticut, which is about 40 minutes apart. And then I grew up a lot in like the late 90s, early 2000s around a lot of activity happening in baseball. So it was a lot of also just my own reflection on that moment and also just coming of age as a baseball player, as a baseball fan. So just, and including like the history of Jackie Robinson, history before him and then the history after him. So.
I just finished a book by a columnist from Kansas City, Joe Posnasky, and
Oh yeah.
he's written a lot of books, and he followed Buck O'Neill around the time that he was getting ready to get into the Hall. Like there was the announcement. Obviously, he got in after the fact, but it was kind of this lead up. But he was talking about his personal memories of figures like Jackie Robinson and Satchel Paige, and how central they were to the change in baseball, but it radiated out more into society. There was a level of what they were doing that required a lot of courage to get to that point. So for you, when you really like hone in on Jackie Robinson and the legacy and lore, being a baseball fan, but also being somebody that understands the importance that he proved in our society, how magnanimous is he to you?
I mean, he's on the Mount Rushmore conversation of most important American athlete. And like you said before, I mean, he changed baseball, but he also changed society.
Yeah.
I mean, baseball was integrated before like the armed services. And I mean, he was a veteran and he had a situation similar to like Rosa Parks, where he refused to give up his seat for a white man. And I mean, just the strength he carried throughout his period, throughout his playing career, and then afterwards, especially towards the end of his life, where he was like kind of banging the table for. I remember one of his final, I think it was his last public appearance at the one of the World Series, where he said he was proud to be there, but he even prouder when he sees like a black manager. And I mean, unfortunately, I don't think he saw that happen, but just he was still banging the table for equality well after his playing days.
So, what did you learn about Jackie or yourself in this process of writing these poems? I mean, every project hatches these levels of revelation that seep into who you are. It changes who you are. What was it about this process of writing these poems that you learned about him or that changed in you in this process?
That's a really good question. I feel like as I was going throughout this collection, I just, and I'm not sure if this is like I don't know, the best answer, but I just felt like I really see myself developing as a writer just because this is my fourth collection. This is my first full collection in a few years. And I look at my first two collections, which I love, and it's just interesting seeing the progress I've made as a writer compared to where I am now, and not just in terms of like the actual each poem, but also just how I structure and organize things. And now that this collection is about to be out and just going on and talking about it and being able to because that's something I've struggled with in the past. I feel like I didn't do as good of a job as like explaining what the collection meant to me as a writer and what I tried to put out with it. And I feel like I've done a better job of that this cycle around. So I just feel like from also just learning about baseball, learning more about baseball history because I've always been a big fan of baseball history and being able to like kind of put that into a poetry collection and and not just a nonfiction book, but just a poetry collection, which is something most people probably assume goes well with sports, but I feel like it does. And I think that's I mean those are some of the things off the top of my head that as this is about to publish, what I'm thinking about as I've kind of progressed as a writer.
You know, it's interesting. This collection, you sent over some samples, and just your style in general feels like you're having a good conversation about baseball with a friend. There's a level of kind of your meter and the way that you kind of go through your stream of consciousness that's very comforting. And you have your book with you now. Is there a poem that you want to pick out of there that you can kind of recite so we can give everybody a taste of, your rhythm and flow with what you do.
Oh yeah, so let me read this collection. This is a poem called Willie Mays Playing Stickball. Willie Mays Playing Stickball. In 1951, Willie Mays was in the streets of New York City, scorching frozen ropes off a broomstick, which roared past Parkside mirrors on St. Nicholas Place. The summer bell had rung in the city, so the children could play stickball all day, or at least until first pitch at the polo grounds, with the Say Hey Kid, who was going to bust the city and the sport into two, like the great Babe Ruth. In 1958, Willie Mays moved to California, and there were no more gods in Harlem. The children remained mindful of cars for their city games, and Mickey Mantle was a worthy substitute as the best ball player in New York. Children didn't see the Say Hey Kid as often, only Willie in newsprint or on television, and there were no more professional players playing stickball with the neighborhood kids, because Willie Mays was just that kind of special.
And I love it. And the beauty of baseball is that we harken back to a time before this rapid AI world of social media and everything. Like stickball, you just don't hear about much anymore. I'm sure it's still getting played on the streets of Brooklyn, especially in New York. That's what festers those thousands of dreams. But I was in that same book that I was reading. I didn't realize this. That catch over the shoulder that he made
Hmm.
was not documented. He had to recreate that for the newsreels.
Oh, that's
So,
interesting.
isn't that weird? So, all
Yeah.
the people that were there that day, how poetic is that? That, like, really, like, the most important catch in baseball history. Like, if you boil all of the moments that we've seen collectively, that catch is the most memorialized one. It was recreated. So, everybody that was there at that point, that's it. They got to relive that memory, and no one captured it. So it that's poetic in itself.
That's one of the things I really find fascinating, not just about baseball, but sports in general. How they parallel society, kind of like what you're talking about with like the modern age. And I know this might sound like kids get off my lawn, but like what you mentioned before, like I don't really see kids nowadays just kind of going out and playing football, playing basketball, which is what me and my brothers and me and my friends did all summer long. And kind of like going back to the idea like what Jackie Robinson was doing, and even the athletes before Jackie Robinson, say like Negro League players, and like how like Babe Ruth was like before Babe Ruth, I mean before LeBron James, in terms of like what that means to like being like a huge superstar, it was like Babe Ruth. And even before like the Negro Leagues, it was like Moses Fleetwood Walker, someone who played. It was between like Moses Fleetwood Walker and Jackie Robinson, and like that 60 years of when a black African American was in baseball. So that's one of the things I really enjoy, like especially dissecting about sports, just because like the playing game, the surface is actually fun and I like watching it, but it's also I like reading about and talking about the off the field issues. So
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting too. The reason why I love digging into the history of like the Negro Leagues, like we have the museum here, and Buck made it very clear these were not people that just played in another league. They were the best athletes. They were better than the athletes that were in Major League Baseball. I mean, he went on and on about Satchel Paige. Like he was the one. Like of all pitchers that have ever played the game, he may have been one of the greatest, but he just wasn't in the major leagues. And he goes on and on about Cool Papa Bell and all these cats that were doing it. And it just happened to be that time in America where they weren't in the major leagues, but they were better than the major league players at the time, right?
I know I recently and we watching Ken Burns' amazing baseball documentary, and he talked about that how like one of like the most celebrated managers like John McGraw was like learning from like Negro League players, and how like Rube Foster was helping white players like learn the screwball. And and I know he mentions a statistic, and I think it was about 400 games where whites and blacks had played like on a not like in a professional game, but just like off, like during like the off season or something. And like black teams won more than they lost against the white players. Like you mentioned before, like Buck mentioned before, these weren't just like guys straight off the street just playing baseball and just having fun with it. I mean, these guys were like great baseball players, and it's a
Yeah,
shame that I mean the people who got to watch them. I mean, it's a memory I couldn't imagine. I really wish I could have been there to watch it, but I mean, just as a memory like they could cherish. But it's a shame that like more people didn't get a chance to like see the great play.
absolutely. Well, let's go back in your lineage here. You're originally from New York, correct?
Yes, so I'm originally from Westchester County, New Rochelle, New York, and then I grew up in Stratford, Connecticut. But then I still went to New York often. And like I mentioned before when we were talking earlier, like I went to Shea Stadium. That was my first professional Mets game, my first professional game in general. And I went to Old Yankee Stadium. And so I grew up in like the late 90s, early 2000s, which was a very interesting period. Not just on the field, because you have like the first Subway Series in like 50, 60 years. You have like the Yankees dynasty. You have 2003, 2004, when the Yankees and Red Sox were going back and forth, when you have like the end of the curse, but then also just off the field issues that were happening in like the realm of sports in that area, in the tri-state area, where like Yankee and Mets get new stadiums, like the Giants get a new stadium, like the end of like the Patrick Ewing era Knicks, and
Yeah.
even like in media with like Mike and the Mad Dog. I moved down to North Carolina, which I'm at now. Like Mike and the Mad Dog had just ended when I moved down. And like Yes Network is celebrating their 25-year anniversary this year. And before that, I mean, I won't remember watching Yankee games and not having Yes Network. So I mean, I'm just very glad that I grew up in the time that I did. So,
Well, when we look in the afterglow of living through COVID, these tumultuous moments in American history, 9/11 was a big deal, and New York was obviously the focal point. But that series, that whole thing that was going on at the time was seminal for the healing of this country, too, during that era you're talking about. When
oh,
baseball
definitely.
came back and the series was here and all of that, that was such a huge time for healing, which is interesting. When you look at the pantheon of baseball.
I actually have a poem that kind of talks about that moment.
And
You
I
want me to
love
read
it.
it?
I read that. You sent that to me. I would love for you to read that because that was
Okay.
great.
So this is called Mike Piazza Brings Some Normalcy to the World. Baseball players, given their outfits, would not be mistaken for fireflies or police officers when they themselves are in uniform. But on the days after 9/11, we're numb to things, staring off and fixated on the new hole in the sky filled with the remnants of souls and smoke. So maybe baseball players do look like firefighters or police officers. We're not really focused right now, not on outfielders or relievers, but really the survivors, and especially the faces taped to fence posts in downtown Manhattan. But at least for tonight, on the first day of baseball, since that morning when we realized that the world was strung upon a very weak cord, for the collectors of steel and spackle, for the friends, spouses, and children who watched their beloved ones become angels on live television, in their royal blue pinstripe uniform, baseball players are still not firemen or police officers. Yet, Mike Piazza and the Mets do become wound dressers. So,
Yeah.
I was a kid when 9/11 happened. So I mean I remember we got out of school, but I mean I was 6, 7 years old, so I really did not know what was happening.
Yeah.
And at that time we were living in Connecticut. And my dad was he was a firefighter in Westchester County,
Wow.
and he just happened to be off on that day, so he was in Connecticut. And it was a moment that I mean I still I mean, 'cause I know the anniversary is about to come up. I do have struggles with that just because it's a very tough. I mean, it's a tough moment for the nation. But even just 90 minutes away from Manhattan, it
Yeah.
was like a moment that I guess for a previous generation, it's like when JFK was assassinated, or when MLK was assassinated. So it's just a moment that like that's really stuck with me since that day, and I couldn't imagine being in that hub. But like what the poem mentions, and like you talked about before, like sports became like a healing mechanism.
Yep.
In that first Mets game when Mike Piazza hits a game-winning home run, and in the 2001 World Series when the Yankees and Diamondbacks are going back and forth, like, and the Yankees are trailing in every home game, and they come off and win like a miraculous fashion. So it definitely really helped, like a community, helped the city. So.
Absolutely. It's interesting the parallelism between baseball and poetry. Of all people, I heard this clip this summer. Billy Corgan, the lead singer of the Smashing Pumpkins,
Mhm.
loves baseball, and he was talking about how every single game that we watch in baseball is completely different. There's never two games that are the same. It's kind of like jazz and it's like poetry. And I find that interesting intersection of poetics and baseball to be such there's a lot of commonality between them because it's all just this kind of there's a simplicity. There's 26 letters and you can come up with this wonderful world in poetry that you create. And in baseball, there's just 9 innings, there's a baseball, there's bats, there's these guys that are ready to play. There's just such a wonderful. So how did you marry those two together? Or I guess more accurately, take me back to your beginning of this love of poetry.
So yeah, I mean, I began loving poetry when I was in the eighth grade, and I had a wonderful teacher. Her name was Miss Anne-Marie Donnelly, and we were in Connecticut. And I definitely I see the jazz aspect. I see that a lot in my poetry, and I think it maybe comes from like the origins of like when I started writing, just because it wasn't jazz, but it was actually folk music because she was teaching a lesson on poetry, and we would look at the lyrics of like Paul Simon and Bob Dylan, and knowing how, like like their influences, which a lot of them were like black artists, not necessarily in jazz, but like in like the blues, and I've just kind of kept going at it since that period, and I've just kind of expanded my taste Because I mean, I obviously I read writers and I read poets and I pick up on things, but it's also like I love listening to like blues and jazz, like you mentioned. I definitely see that trickling into my own poetry, especially as I've gotten older, like reading the writers of the Harlem Renaissance, who were greatly influenced by jazz, such as Langston Hughes, Zora Neale Hurston, and just like the folk culture that of just the average kind of folk. Just because I always consider myself an average day, average kind of folk. So,
It's interesting. I have a jazz radio show called Neon Jazz, and I interview a lot of musicians from Brooklyn. And I
mhm.
feel like there's a level of Harlem Renaissance that's a part of what's going on there right now. And, a lot of people are living in Brooklyn because of the economics of New York, but
Yeah.
there's just such a wonderful, there's such an artistic glow that's going on there right now. There's so many artists that are converging and that are a part of that scene. So I almost think when we look at the annals of history and we look back, this might be a level of renaissance that's going on right now. It may not be highly publicized, but I
Yeah.
think Brooklyn and that area is a fertile ground of creativity that's happening before our eyes right now. And we might just be too close to it.
I know we were talking earlier about we were kind of complaining about the young generation. They don't go out and play anymore. But I mean, that is like one of the benefits because I mean, there is no perfect, I guess, era. I mean, there are benefits and cons like each era. And I think that's a really tremendous benefit in this time where it's more accessible to like write poetry, to get into music and get into like the visual arts, just because, especially for like black artists, it was extremely troubling and challenging.
Yeah.
Say since before like 1940, 1950. But now, nowadays, it's. I mean, with the internet, you have so many resources and tools. You take online courses like that help develop your own skills. So this is a great time, and I definitely recommend. And I definitely agree that like this is definitely like a special moment that we're going through in terms of like the art that's coming out.
Yeah, for sure. So, do you remember the first poem that you wrote and you showed it or read it to somebody and you got that visceral response and it confirmed that what you were doing made sense? It gave you more fuel to want to do it more.
I do. I remember I have the file on my computer, and I wrote this in eighth grade, and it was talking about the idea of because I don't have it in front of me, but the idea of I'm more than just an athlete. Kind of like with Jack Robinson, he was more than just an athlete, but especially for African Americans, the idea that it's not just like shut up and dribble. You can have a voice just because even before you were playing with sports, you were born black, you're gonna die black. So in that 5, 10, 15 year career when you're an athlete, you're still gonna be black. So you can still have those conversations that you were having before you were playing and like after you were playing. So that was the first poem I definitely remember feeling like because I read it and like my classmates like they all loved it, my teacher loved it. So that was a moment that like really still stuck with me. So
So what about poets? There's always in your development as a poet, you're reading poetry, but who's the poet that first blew you away that you just couldn't get enough of?
the first poet I would say is probably Langston Hughes.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's a lot of way for like a lot of black poets. And I just loved his blues. And it felt like it was rhythmic. It was rhythmic, but it wasn't like metered. Just because before him, I was reading a lot of poetry where it was like very rhythmic and metered and very structured. And I mean that's his own lane, and it's very beautiful. And it's very challenging to write that book, but I like the idea of just kind of writing and just kind of going from there, and not having it structured in a certain type of way. And I guess, I mean, for him, it would be someone like Carl Sandburg, Walt Whitman, Paul Laurence Dunbar, who wrote in like the free verse. And that's, I mean, a lot of my poetry is in free verse. So he's been someone, him, and then those three that I just mentioned before, they're probably, in terms of like the classic poets, the ones that I have probably most influenced me.
The one thing that we've talked about is this idea of the old days and this kind of modern era, stickball to like AI and social media. But you had mentioned going to both of those seminal stadiums, Yankee Stadium and Shea Stadium. And in Kansas City, we just passed a vote to build a new stadium. And I
Oh,
always feel like when I'm going in there now, I'm in the bones of something that's going to leave. It's almost like you're always waiting for your last goodbye. And that's poetry in itself. What is it? Do you ever like think, why did they get rid of old Yankee Stadium? Why would they get rid of Shea Stadium? Does that ever go through your head as you get into these new stadiums?
I think more so Yankee Stadium.
Yeah.
And because I mean, when we were talking about earlier, I went to Shea Stadium about 4 or 5 times in childhood. I went to Yankee Stadium one time. It was a very memorable game. It was the time when Orlando Hernandez took like the Ephus pitch, that Alex Rodriguez, and he like blasted it to the moon when he was playing with the Texas Rangers.
Yeah.
And cause I talked to my dad about this, who went to more stadium, who went to more games at Shea Stadium than I did. So I kind of he's someone that I take a lot of he has a lot of credibility to me. And he was telling me like Shea Stadium probably they probably did need to move on with that, but we both agreed like Yankee Stadium, especially with the new stadium, where because I've been to the new Yankee Stadium and it's really nice,
Yeah.
but it doesn't have, and I know there isn't a way to like I don't know like frame this in like a statistic, but it just feels like the old stadium had like a lot more spirit and soul, and I mean the new stadium again is like very nice, very pristine. I had a really nice seats, and it was the season when Aaron Judge hit 62 home runs. And it
Wow.
was like really cool. The Yankees had a really great team. It was a great experience. But I do, especially with like all the history that was happening there. And even then, like the old Yankee Stadium, that was different from like the stadium before like 1977 when they were doing reconstruction over there. So I mean, I still love the old Yankee Stadium, but it's also I grew up in a time when like it was the hub because it was the Yankees dynasty. They were in every October. So maybe if this recent iteration of teams became a dynasty, maybe I wouldn't feel that way.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, I totally get it. So, what's your approach to writing? Do you have a philosophy of writing every day? How do you go about constructing your words and your poetry? How does that work for you? Is there a flow that you get into
I
that's
try to
rhythm?
write it. I try to write every day. It's
Yeah,
definitely very tough with a 9 to 5,
yeah,
and I feel like as I've gotten older, it's become tougher. But I mean, you do have to sacrifice some things, and I tell people this that like I don't watch a lot of TV. I don't watch. I mean, I watch movies, but like I don't watch a lot of TV shows. Like the last TV show I probably watched from end to full was like The Good Place, and it was a good show. But like I just you don't have you need to focus on what's most important to you, and for me that's writing. So I try to write every day, especially on the weekends. I spend a lot of time writing on the weekends. And once I'm in that stage, like I try not to answer the phone. I try not to look at my phone. I'll listen to some music and I'll just be writing and I'll be writing and like and then like editing and revising and also throughout the week and on the weekends, like I read because you're never going to become a great writer unless you read. So I
yeah.
definitely, and that's what I really try to emphasize with people. So I write when I can, especially on the weekends, and like I read every day. So
And you obviously know the economics of being a poet in America in 2026 is not a fruitful vocation. It's
yeah.
hard. Like one part of it is writing, but then the other part, which can be harder, is the promotion and getting it out there and getting it in people's hands. How do you remain hopeful in this landscape of something like poetry that you can't make, most people can't make a regular living on, but it's a passion project? How do you remain hopeful and buoyant about what you're doing?
Tell me, I mean, especially like the wood you just used, like where's the passion? Where, like you said before, it's not easy to be a working poet. And I look at also like the writers that came before me, and like a lot of the writers that we study in classrooms, a lot of them were like working class people. A lot of them weren't able like to make a living just writing. And that also gives me hope too that the idea that these people that we're studying now, these people that we're analyzing, these people that inspire generations of writers and readers, that in their own time, they were kind of like in a similar situation with me and like a lot of writers that I know that they're working 9 to 5s or they have regular jobs and they're just kind of writing when they can. And like I mentioned before earlier about where like each collection that I've written, I feel like I've gotten a little better at just the marketing because you get more experience, you get more in terms of like how's the best way to go about this, what's the best way to go about that. So I feel like I don't know, it's also maybe like just the athlete in me. Like it's hard for me to like just quit and not do something. So like I just kind of always stick with it. So
So yeah, and that's the other thing too, is that I think being a poet today is you have this chance of motivating writers that are younger to do it. You know, they get your book, they see it, and they can be bedazzled, and that can be the beginnings. And it's like anything, like jazz. Jazz isn't the most popular medium, but there's so many elders like Sonny Rollins that have inspired younger generations. Even in baseball, countless examples. Do you ever find that what you're doing is fuel for these younger generations? That's kind of a part of what you're doing because you love this craft that's completely fueled by your soul.
it's nice when it happens, but that's also like not like I'm looking for, if
Yeah.
that makes any sense.
Hmm.
Where I mean, because people have come up to me, like people send me messages like my website, or they'll send me an email, like and they'll like highlight a poem or a collection they really like, and I really appreciate it. I'm very grateful for that. But I don't usually when I'm writing, I don't go say I hope this inspires
Right.
Johnny in Utah. So I mean,
Yeah.
it's nice, it really is, but again, it kind of goes back to the idea you mentioned before about like passion, where I'm just doing this. I hope if people read this, great. If they don't, I wish they would, but it's okay if they don't. Because I think of the going back to Langston Hughes, he had his in his essay, like the Negro artists in the racial mountain, where he's talking about about creatives and the idea of if white people like it, great. If they don't, that's okay. And it's same for like for black audiences. If they like it, great. If not, it's okay. Just because I know he faced some criticism from like from both whites and blacks. So
So, talk to me a little bit about heroes. Like, ultimately, who has been that hero for you beyond kind of the literary realm, just in your life? Who has fueled you and inspired you to create and to write and to publish and to continue on this creative journey?
I mean, I have a few, but I would definitely, I mean, it all begins with my parents.
Yeah.
My parents, I mean, they really instilled in me and my siblings like a love for reading. And once I got into poetry, like they really just let me, they made it like to go out and do your thing. If you like it, great. If not, it's okay. We'll love you anyway. We'll support you anyway. And like I'm always talking with them, like seeking advice. So I mean, I always love my parents, and I mean they're the people who began it for me. So. And then, like I mentioned before, like Miss Anne Marie Donnelly in Bridgeport, Connecticut. She was very, I mean, without her, I don't know if I get into poetry.
Yeah.
So, without her, I mean, yeah. So I would say off the top of my head, those are three that like come to mind in terms of like heroes that have inspired me in my career.
So at this point, everyone has a perception of you, family, friends, fans, everyone that knows you in different realms, but you run the show that we see. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
I think I'm a poet who likes to talk about sports and race and music and pop culture and jazz and faith in his collection. He's someone that I'm in the third person. I'm someone who likes to like who at the end of the day also just loves just hanging out with family and friends, just watching TV and just I mean watching really sports really, and like putting on a movie and just kind of hanging out with people that I know and care about, like reading when I can. So I mean I still view myself as the same kid in newest show in Stratford, Connecticut. So I'm not sure that's like the best answer, but
No, it's good.
that's kind of how I view myself.
I dig it. So Jackie Robinson Real Gone is the newest book and a collection of books that you have out in the world. So if anybody wants to get a copy of the Jackie Robinson volume or anything else that you've done, anything else going on in your world, readings, any news, where do they go? Where's the best place?
The best place would be going to my website, which is www.matthewjohnsonpoetry.com. And there you could see Jackie Robinson's Real Gone Baseball Poems in New York, but also my three other collections. And I have links to where you can buy them from like the publisher's website or from my own independent bookstore in Greensboro, North Carolina, or even on Barnes and Nobles. And also you can even order it from your own individual local bookstores as well. So
Right on. Well, I will put links in the show notes. I'll make it easy. Matthew, this has been wonderful. Thank you, sir. Thank you for taking a minute out. Best of luck with the new volume and everything you're putting out in the world. I appreciate it.
I really appreciate it, Joe. Thank you.
You bet.